Hi, I'm Tyler Fertel here, joined by the Chief Growth and Strategy Officer at Elevate Sports Ventures, Ben Gumpert. Mr. Gumpert, thank you very, very much for joining me here today.
Thank you for having me, Tyler. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we're gonna have some fun today, and I'm excited to touch a bunch of different realms and kind of projects that you've been involved in throughout your career in the sports industry. And I want to start with your role at Elevate Sports Ventures, which is your current profession, your current this current status of your career. And so your company's goal is to elevate teams, brands, venues, and leagues by finding their limits and pushing them forward. And as the chief growth and strategy officer, it's part of your role to really contribute to that. So in your opinion, what are the key ways to make something recognizable or prominent in the sports industry?
Yeah, like a lot of things, there's a lot of different pathways, and it's a real amazing opportunity for me. And just I always thank my lucky stars each day just to be a part of the industry, right? And sports entertainment. Like it's crazy that I get to wake up and go to work and work on some of the things that even when I was a kid, right? Like I just dreamed about and thought about growing up in Sacramento and remembering when the Kings came. Certainly then in my career later on, being a part of the NBA and others, which I know we'll talk about. It's just, it's an amazing industry, but also an industry that continues to like be the best and push forward. And my colleagues at Elevate and our CEO, Al Guido, who helped to found this with an amazing board of investors as well, and an amazing team now, is around like, hey, how do we continue to elevate, right? Pun intended, what we do, what the experiences that we're creating for fans and for the communities that we are in, right? And we all know that sports teams and properties are very much not just a part of the community, have like an outsized platform and responsibility, I would say, as to the community that surrounds them. So when we talk about building new venues and doing it in the right way that embraces the community, that it represents the community in which they are founded. When we talk about creating fan experiences that will never be forgotten, right? That money can't buy, that are just, that will last the test of time. And when we talk about all of those things, right? In physical spaces, in emotional spaces, and talk through storytelling and design and sales and marketing and everything else that we do as part of the agency, we feel like there's an opportunity to pull that all together, right? Like this art and science, as we call it at Elevate, of like, hey, let's use as much data as possible. And I focus a lot on how we can ingest and create and understand the most data that's out there to help inform how we make those decisions. But of course, like there's this other part of like, well, what does that mean? And yes, like data is static. How do we query it in the right way to help us understand what is most impactful for fans, for customers? What has never been done before that can make the largest impact? How do we translate zeros and ones and data into creative, into design, into storytelling? Because we all know, and as much as I love data, right? Like people don't listen to data and statistics, they listen to stories. And we are all part of that. And so how do we sort of bring people along that entire journey? And I'm proud to say that's what we're focused on at Elevate, and have had an amazing run here as a company for the last few years, doing things that I don't think any agency has done before, but we certainly have a long way to go.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about a big part of sports overall is creating this connection between fans and leagues and venues and everything. I mean, that's what makes the sports industry so great, is that there are so many aspects to it that kind of bring it all together and make it a one-of-a-kind experience. So what would you consider that connection that you're building between those that enjoy the sport and those behind the scenes of sport as like the coolest part of your job, that you kind of get to facilitate the whole thing and make sure everything runs smoothly?
It's all cool. And I think for each project, and now, when I went from the team where you're working on, I mean, certainly there's many projects even within a team, but you're kind of like one team, one property, to now, being in an agency where we work with, and on the same day, I might be talking to our friends and colleagues at Formula One and US Open in New York, and talking about tennis and the Tennessee Titans, and talking about NFL football and the Washington Spirit and the NWSL. So it's amazing to be able to work across that spread. And yes, there is a common thread, right, about that connection between sports and fans and community, but they do it in different ways. They have different assets, different storytellers, different investors and owners and executives leading the way and different brands. And I think one of the most fun parts to your question of like the intellectual challenge, but also just the fun part of doing what we do is like with that same engine, right? Or same underlying passion, right? Like that makes us all love sports. Like how can this manifest in different ways and in different communities to create still an amazing impact that's set to last? And it's a ton of fun. And it's a challenge and a huge opportunity in front of all of us.
Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about this a little later, but the new Light the Beam slogan, for example, with the Kings, does that happen a lot in terms of sports franchises and venues and everything? Is that one of the main roles of Elevate, to kind of create a brand that really does stand out? Because, for example, I mean, it kind of ignited the Kings franchise recently. I mean, it became one of the most popular things in the NBA when, if we're going to be honest, I know you might not like this as a Kings fan. I mean, the franchise was irrelevant for almost the past decade, and this seemed to almost like kind of revamp the whole project and everything. So,
first of all, shots fired, Tyler. So we made it, it's 5 minutes in. So you're going after my Kings. I mean, I love my Kings. Like I noted at the beginning, right? I remember being actually just shy of 5 years old and going to my first game with my dad when they came, and there wasn't a professional sports team in Sacramento, and then there was. And I think, and working at the NBA and now, like, I mean, there's so many amazing brands and so many amazing stories. But of course, just on a personal level, like talking about being able to understand that connection between a community, a fan, a kid growing up in Sacramento, like your place to what represents you, and have this team that we talked about, wears Sacramento across your chest, right? And even when I was living in New York and LA and other places, right? Like you'd see a Kings fan like wearing, how do you say you're from Sacramento? It was like, among other things, like you wear Kings gear, right? Like there's no other way to do it at the time. And we'll talk about the Sacramento Republic as well. But in the subway, I had a little tip of the cap and other things that happened all the time. To your Light the Beam, I mean, though I used to work at the Kings, we're not working with the Kings now at Elevate, certainly are fans of the league and the team, and on a personal level, they're still my squad. I went to a couple of the playoff games most recently. I think it's fantastic. And Light the Beam, right? And like I get to see it sometimes outside of my house or when I was at a game and go outside. It's just amazing how the community and fans jumped onto that. But like the connection between the community and the fans and the team and what it represented, and it's really a fan-owned team, right? Like you talk about a fan base that saved the team, and it could have moved so many different ways, right? Like you talk about a connection that's developed, it gets developed in those ways. We work on some of that for stadiums, right? And tying a story around the stadium, which again, I got to personally work on Golden One Center. Now at Elevate, we're alongside teams and executives that are building stadiums that have their own story, right? That's certainly integrated with the team, but is in many ways also distinct and can have a story on its own. There's so many ways to do it. And you kind of, when you see something like Light the Beam in that example, and you just see the community embrace it, like then that's when you know the magic. That's how the magic happens. Sometimes it's hard to put your finger on why that happens, but it's amazing to see when it does. Again, I think for all the teams and properties out there that are telling stories and really getting to the essence of like what makes them special, what makes them unique, where that connection is between themselves and fans, then you're going to see those things pop up.
And we'll stay on the theme of your Kings fandom real quick, since we're already there. So obviously, like you said, you worked for the Kings, but you're also a massive fan, like you said. So from a marketing perspective, this Light the Beam thing, like I said, kind of reignited the whole franchise, but it also was a successful season for the Kings. It was their first playoff appearance in a while. You guys won the Pacific Division. So how big of a success would you consider the season for the Kings?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm going to speak as a fan, and I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. And I still have so many friends and colleagues there that I worked with, that are still there and a part of it. And I just the text messages alone, and I'll try not to tear up here, from friends, colleagues, community members, council members, mayors, state senators, like the list goes on and on and on and on and on. And when they made the playoffs this year, it was like, and you have not just amazing games, right? Like they were packed to the brim. Like that's not surprising, but just even the crowds outside and like the amount of excitement around it. And, you know, to think back not too long ago that this team was almost not here. Mm-hmm. Right. And like in a very real sense. And even before I joined the Kings, I was at the NBA, mm-hmm. New York. But one of my roles was to be a part of this team that was going out to figure out like, hey, are the Kings going to move to Anaheim or San Jose or Seattle or even Virginia Beach or all, like there were a lot of different things going on at the time. And Commissioner Stern at the time, like who is still just one of the most amazing people that I've ever met and come across. And I feel incredibly fortunate just to have spent a bit of time with him. Like was very clear that, hey, this is a fan base. This is a community that has earned the right many times over to have their team and to keep their team. Mm-hmm. And yes, we need to make the economics work. And yes, they need a new arena, but we're going to make that work. And there were huge fan rallies, as you know, like the mayor at the time and his team and the entire city council was like stepped up in a big way. And the state stepped up in a big way to help facilitate a quicker construction of the arena in a place that was very necessary in Sacramento. And so long answer to your question, but just like, that's what I like talk about success. I mean, absolutely. Right. Like not that any of us needed validation, but just to see and have the whole country see, which sometimes is nice. Like, hey, like this is why. Just think of an NBA that didn't have Sacramento. It would not be the same. It would just won't be the same. And so we cherish that, we treasure it, and we're thankful for it. And I think it's also something that's really, really well deserved by the Sacramento community.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'm a Lakers fan, so you know what? It's. I
mean, I figured. The way you were talking before.
Yeah, I mean, we're playing the Warriors right now. Hopefully, we'll wrap up the series quite soon. I mean, I don't even want to get there because I'm very nervous about that. But in terms of the Kings fan base, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, I think every single Kings game that I watched, the sound barrier was broken, and it's just like I bet you experienced that in person. I mean, that is not something I expected from the Sacramento franchise, especially because, like we've been talking about, I mean, it's all here now. It wasn't here a couple of years ago. Now it's all here. I mean, it seemed to be like the fans were always around, but now that the team is really competitive, they seem to get very involved.
The fans are always there, man.
Yeah.
And it was a tough drought on the court, but I think we always knew that it would come around, right? Like there's always cycles here, and maybe this cycle is longer than we were all hoping for. But the fan base, like again, closing out Arco Arena, Sleep Train Arena at the time, and that's when I was at the Kings and in the process of moving to a new stadium. But even on non-playoff teams there, we would sell it out, pack it, broke the sound barrier, Guinness World Records a couple times. Like, again, there's so many great fan bases across the country, but I will always hold Sacramento on a pedestal, and I think well deserved. And it's good for the league, it's good for sports, and it's certainly great for Sacramento.
Here's the big question, though: will they be able to keep it up in the next year?
Again, as a fan and now spending a ton of time on the business side of sports, I try to stick to my expertise. So I'm not the prognosticator. What I do know is I certainly loved what I saw overall and the court, and not just what they did from a win-loss record and making a good showing in the playoffs, but just the team building, how, again, going back to the community, I know I've used that word 100 times, but like that's because I believe in it, and that's what I focus on. How the players embrace the community in Sacramento, like it's a good sign for things to come. And again, I think there's no more deserving fan base.
Mm-hmm. I definitely think that there was a couple, or after you guys traded for Sabonis and Fox seemed not happy, there was all this controversy. Are you guys gonna be able to keep the guys? Guarantee you'll be able to keep your big name players now. You'll definitely attract even more as well. which it'll be great to see for the Pacific Division. Transitioning more into kind of your past professional experiences, one of your major roles in both your current and previous occupations has been to advise private equity firms in pursuing investment opportunities in the sports and entertainment industry. So there's been a recent increase in private equity interest in investing in sports. Why do you think this has occurred? Like, what led to this?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons. One is, I think just the foundation comes from like the value of sports, right? Like we can talk about it. We'll get into all the other reasons why maybe this has opened up in ways that it hasn't before, but none of that comes if sports and sports teams specifically, now that we're talking about sports teams, aren't a amazing asset, right? And like before we get into financial assets, it's also just all the conversation we're having about the connection between a fan base and a community and the team, and how lasting and how strong that is. Mm-hmm. And yes, and like if you can root on your team in person or watch them on TV, and you're a brand that wants to be associated with it, right? Like there's a good ecosystem, and as sports continues to be this business or this operation that can be recession proof, right? Because like good times, bad times, we all love our teams. Like that's why I think first and foremost, it's a bit of interest. What's changed is a few things. One is as team valuations have grown over time, like you start to see a couple things. One, a lot of teams, when the Kings were purchased, we had about 35, maybe 36 investors in a group to put that together. Right, leagues have started to tamp that down further, right? Just for control of governance and just easing of the system. So as that number goes down, like, well, who do those minority investors sell to? Mm-hmm. And private equity became an option, right? Where they can consolidate a lot of minority investors that don't have control positions in teams, but can put in investment dollars, and not just dollars, right? They're not just money. And now I work a ton with Arctos Sports Partners, another amazing group of people and visionaries, right? That talk a lot about like, yes, there's a check, right? That comes with their investment, just like any investor, but they're value-added investors too, right? They now have expertise in media and sports gambling and ticket sales and sponsorship. And we Elevate and myself certainly work with them alongside them, right? In order to help to fill any of those gaps. But now you have investors that aren't just the dollars, but it's dollars plus knowledge and access and best practices and other things that become much better and more value-added capital. And then the last thing is just as valuations itself continue to go up, right? And I think as we are sitting here today, the Commanders were just announced at $6 billion. Right? Like as those numbers get higher and higher, there's only so many people that have the dollars mm-hmm. to be in a control position or even minority position, right? A 10% position in the Commanders by that valuation would be $600 million, which is it's a big check. And Tyler, I'm sure as you continue to sell ads for your podcast, you'll get there quickly. But still $600 million is a good chunk of change. So when you look at positions like that, it's like, well, how can we continue to raise valuations and have the investors come in the right way? Private equity and the amount of capital that they have and that they're pulling from multiple sources to do that is a really good solution. So like a lot of things, I think a confluence of things happening that are helping to push our industry forward. And of course, when done the right way, I think is a huge boost for all of us. More capital means more resources, means more investments in our stadiums and arenas, and more investments in our fan base, and more investments in the media product, and so on. More investments in player care and healthcare, like you name it. And with that investment, hopefully we can continue to grow this industry that we all love.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about the whole idea of the firms being made up of a bunch of minority people or minority owners that want to get involved with the sports. Like, for example, you brought up the Commanders as well, who it's a big firm led by a certain couple people. But then, for example, a person like Magic Johnson who wants to get involved is a minority owner part of the Commanders now, which is pretty cool. So
your Lakers fan. You're a
What?
Lakers guy. You're a Lakers guy getting
I'm
involved.
I'm a Lakers guy for sure. But in terms of what you've seen in your roles when being involved with those that are looking to buy venues, teams, whatever it is, what are their primary motivations behind it? Is it always in terms of money, or is it in terms of fandom, or just kind of just the want to be involved with an organization like that?
Yeah, I see it much more on the latter. And of course, there's always something about making sure that the investment works, right? Especially for private equity, right? It's like their mandate is that it's an investment that works. But certainly a lot of the conversations with the owners and the many owners that I work with and have worked with is far more about like their love of the sport, of the community, of the game, of the organization. Like it's some combo and oftentimes all of the above of that. And again, like when growing up, kind of dream of, whether it's playing fantasy football or just going to a game and saying like, hey, how can I be a piece of this? Like I just even think about like being a governor, right? As the NBA calls it, a governor, owner, and lead and be the leader of that franchise is amazing. It carries a big weight, by the way, as we all know, right? Your fan base expects you to win, to invest, and again, as all fan bases should, like to care about the community, right? Like this is, you're not just the owner of X team, of Sacramento Republic or of the Denver Nuggets or the Seattle Sounders, you name the team, right? Like you are part of the city. And when the team represents the city well, the city embraces it, it helps people walk a little taller, honestly. Like it helps people be more prideful about their place. It helps, neighborly relations. I'm not joking. Like these are all things that happen. Like when you have organizations, sports that brings a community together. And we all know how divisive the world is these days and how much bad stuff there can be out there. Maybe it's a little bit Pollyannish, but I love thinking about like how sports is part of that solution. And like, that's our why, that we can, like no other thing out there, can bring people together that might have very different political views or come from very different backgrounds, but they sit next to each other and cheer and hug when a team scores a goal or scores a touchdown. And like as an owner, investor, as part of that, like you get to be a piece of that and you get to carry that platform. And like I said, I'll repeat, like it's a heavy weight, right? Because like, that you can make an impact in a way that others can, other organizations can. But I think that's what truly draws owners to doing this and to invest, because it's a tough slog sometimes, right? And you're thrust into the spotlight. It's a zero-sum game on the court and on the field too, right? Mm-hmm. Like as much as fan bases want and expect teams to win, and they should, right? Only one team wins. Only one team wins each year. The other 29 or 31 don't. And it's a zero-sum game, right? At the league, they play 500 ball. So when somebody wins, somebody's got to lose. So it's a tough one, but a journey that I think everyone is up for because of the impact that it can have.
Mm-hmm. We've talked a lot about your role in terms of helping and assisting owners and investors in finding the correct fit for them in terms of brands and venues and everything. But you're an investor yourself. I mean, you're invested in the newest LA professional sports franchise in Angel City FC. So as someone involved in this team and league, how have you seen women's soccer grow and improve in the United States recently? And how do you believe it can still take steps?
Like it is an unbelievable experience and unbelievable growth in women's sports overall and women's soccer, especially. And then Angel City, like you said, among many other great NWSL franchises and a great ownership group. I would say, again, to be clear, like when we're talking Magic Johnson or Josh Harris and all these other owners, like I am way, way, way down the list in terms of the checks that my wife and I are writing. But again, such a privilege to be a very, very small part of that process. Like Angel City and women's soccer is amazing. I mean, I've been a fan for a long time. been a fan of soccer for a long time, been a fan of women's sports. I now have two daughters, 13 and almost 11, and get to also see it from their lens, like, which has been eye-opening. One of my proudest jobs, which isn't on my resume, and maybe for good reason, is being a soccer coach to them and seeing these amazing girls and the cheetahs and then the fighting unicorns, where we had a nice run for a few years, do some damage on some other teams, and watch the girls gel and come together and learn about teamwork and discipline, and of course having fun. It is so needed. It is so needed for them to be able to see themselves on the biggest stage, right? Like whether that's the Olympics or the Women's World Cup or professional teams that play in our backyard, right? Or in LA in this case. Like, it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference. And like the league, and it's hard too, right? Like, it takes significant dollars. It's hard to do it slowly, right? Because the players deserve to be paid and compensated and invested in the right way, and to play at world-class facilities. In order to do that, you need dollars. And in order to bring those dollars, you need broadcast eyeballs and sponsors and all those things. So sometimes, like, it's this vicious cycle of like, hey, can we get enough? And I think NWSL and the WNBA and volleyball and League One volleyball, which I'm sure we can talk about too, another amazing organization with an amazing mission, doing a ton to continue to push forward women's sports and women's athletics, and fandom generally. Like, it's just about like, hey, we believe, and we're going to prime the pump. We are going to invest. Like, and again, you talked about whether they do it for return. Yes, I think most would say, hey, if we invest the dollars and we do the right thing, and we do the right thing by our players and by our fans and by our communities and everyone else in that ecosystem, the dollars will work out. It might take years and years and years and years for those dollars to work out, but it'll work out. And if we're focused on the short term, we'll never get there, right? Because you're never investing enough dollars to make it happen. And that's what's happened at NWSL. There's an amazing group of new owners that have come in, with Angel City, with Houston, with Orlando, with the Bay Area NWSL team, with the Utah team coming there, with the Kansas City Current and the Long family, and news of Boston and others coming in. Like, truly, truly incredible in a fairly short amount of time. And like I said, long past due. I think we all agree. Fans have always been there, and I think they're starting to get to have access, like at Angel City, at BMO Stadium now, that in this amazing facility that's now in their backyard, and get to have it on a world-class stage like it deserves. Like, it is freaking awesome. It is awesome. And like, I'm a huge believer and always will be.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, the U.S. women's soccer, I mean, it's the best program in the world. Obviously, Angel City FC has one of the youngest homegrown, one of the best players in the league. I mean, Alyssa Thompson literally goes to one of my neighboring schools, and now she's the star player of Angel City FC. So that's just another crazy thing to think about. But the future of,
17-year-old, I walked in with her family to the first match like 6 weeks ago, and just the look on her sister's face and her dad's face as I was walking in is incredible. And I'll say at Elevate, we've had the good fortune and have worked with the Washington Spirit and Michelle Kang, who's doing an amazing job in Washington and investing a ton of capital to continue to elevate the game there, and to Gotham FC and to Orlando Pride and the Wilf family, who we've worked with the Utah Royals. So like, again, you talk about being fortunate, like, as we talked about at the beginning, I'll say it again. I get to wake up and I love women's soccer. I believe in it, and get to work with these amazing owners, investing a ton of capital and a ton of mind share and a ton of resources to make this grow and spread and fly like it always should have. And it's amazing to see.
Mm-hmm. And with the Women's World Cup coming up this summer out there in Australia and New Zealand, I mean, it's only going to help the NWSL, because not only does the league hold a bunch of the American stars, I mean, there are stars from all over the world that play here. So it'll put the league on a brighter stage as well. I'm looking forward to that.
Me too. And I'm looking forward to seeing it in person in Australia. So
ooh, you're going to go out there?
Oh yeah. Come on. I wouldn't miss it. I'm not just giving you lip service here on this podcast. Like I've been to, I don't know how many women's soccer games now on the professional scale, and I love it. And I'm super excited to see it in Australia on the biggest stage.
Yeah, you're gonna have to let me know how that is. That's gonna be that'll be awesome.
We'll do a podcast live. I'll do one live from down
there. That'd be insane. Kind of moving on, like you talked about, to League One volleyball, which you explained that you're also involved in there as an investor. So as a little investor, as you said before, but so the slogan of the league is that the league is reimagining the future of volleyball, which is the most played girls sport in the United States. So you kind of talked about it before, but I'll let you reiterate it here. What appeals to you about this league, and what suggests progress and growth, especially?
Yeah, a ton of things. I think, first of all, it starts with the people, right? Like a lot of things do. We talked about owners, investors. Like it's certainly also the owners, investors, founders of League One volleyball, like some of whom I've known for 20 years and are not just some of the sharpest people, and most entrepreneurial people, but also great and kind people, and visionary on this. So, if someone's going to figure it out and get it done, like I have faith in them more than anyone. I think, as you noted, volleyball is the most played sport in the world for women. I think it is also, so the participation levels continue to be high. They continue to be high across the world, right? So it's a global game. So we know there's room for global expansion. There's athletes that come from all over the world, just like in basketball and in soccer. Wide participation. It has stayed constant. It is still growing. It is a great sport. It is athletic. It is fun. You can play it in so many different ways, right? 2v2. League One volleyball is mostly in about indoor and teams of 6, right? But like we know that volleyball is also one of those sports that has a fairly flexible model. And with the participation being high, like there's not a existing pro league. Now there's a lot of dollars coming in on volleyball in the US, but there has not been a longstanding real professional league in volleyball. I think, among other things, and there's 50 things about like, well, why is it set up for growth and why it does well. You see college volleyball do extremely well. The NCAA Final Four just broke broadcast records, over 1 million people. I think the last 2 years sold out. Nebraska just sold out 80,000 people in their football stadium for women's volleyball game that's coming up. I got to find a way to get there. But I think what's among all those things, which are amazing, volleyball, the pinnacle of volleyball is women. Men play volleyball and it's an amazing sport and they do great, right? But the highest, most, viewed volleyball is women, not men. And that, I'm not sure that exists in any other sport, or certainly some of these main like top 10 sports, right? Again, we talked about the love for soccer, which I completely believe in, or WNBA, but that is also, hey, men play in this other league that's huge. And then there's a women's league that's continuing to get invested in and grow. Same with soccer. With volleyball, women are at the pinnacle. And I think that's an interesting and unique differentiator that shows that, hey, we don't need to also like come on the backs of, hey, here's a successful men's league. There should be a successful women's league too, which is true. Like that should happen. But hey, can we start a league and start a movement in an ecosystem that is built women first and ground up with women first? And I think that's an incredible concept and a needed one. And they're doing it. And the team at League One Volleyball is building an amazing, like I said, ecosystem that is about youth and college and pro and building it from the ground up and doing it in the right way. I'm excited to see that continue to reach new heights and launch a pro league next year. And I'm thrilled that I get a chance to work with them.
Yeah, I'll definitely be keeping an eye on League One volleyball. You said the league's coming out next year.
So there's a pro league that I'm not trying to break any news here. They've talked about launching a pro league. So love exists, right? Like there's a ton of youth participation. Like they have various tournaments. They have signed some athlete endorsers, but to launch a pro league, we call it Love Pro, right at the top, that will launch in the US after the Paris Olympics, which are next summer. Will launch at the tail end of the year. They've announced 3 markets: Madison, Wisconsin, Houston, Atlanta. so far, all of which already have like a big love ecosystem as part of it. So yes, keep your eyes peeled. Volleyball is awesome. Love is going to take on the world. It's going to be incredible.
Yeah, I'll definitely keep my eye on it. It definitely seems like a big movement and everything. Love volleyball, League One. All right. And I feel like we've been building up to this a little bit, but one of the major steps in your career has been at Sacramento Republic FC, the team out there in your home city. So you spent your time in the organization as the president and COO, and you were actually recognized as one as in the 40 under 40 in the 2020 Sports Business Journal. So obviously you did amazing work, and the club broke multiple league records in terms of ticket sales, attendance, sponsorship, merchandise, and community engagement, and also qualified for the playoffs in all the years you were there. So, I mean, to say the least, it was a successful period while you were there. So what did that experience at Sacramento Republic FC mean to you? And how do you think it has really prepared you for whatever is coming on the rest of your career?
Yeah, man, I know I said earlier that I wouldn't cry, and now like it's getting closer, it's building up, but I feel like I can tamp it down a little bit. Like it meant, and it still means everything. Like when I talked about the Kings and being my first love of sports, right? And harken back to when I was 5 years old, and certainly the team that I followed the longest. But Sacramento Republic, has my heart in so many ways. Like it is, and kudos, like, again, you talk everything that we talked about before, right? And like you said, I liked your intro in here is like building up to this, because everything that we talked about before about a club really being a reflection of the community and caring about, like, this was a ground up, like it was named by the fans. The logo was created by the fans. Like every aspect of this was sort of fan driven, community driven, and in truth. And that's how it feels. And that's how it lives. And to be a steward, like in my role, again, yes, I was president, but I felt like I was just a steward for that brand and bringing the community forward. And Kevin Nagel, who's the owner and still owner of and lead investor and chairman for Sac Republic, who's an amazing person. We talked about owners that care about the community and are doing it not for financial return, but for because they care and they want to build something special and build a lasting impact. Like that was true. We were able to build an amazing team. And like you said, like, yes, like when you do the right things, when you do good things, the business works, right? Like, yes, sponsors and partners want to be a part of it because they know that you're a brand that stands for something and does what you say you're going to do. Mm-hmm. And people want to be a part of that. And fans want to come and hold hands and like celebrate like the good times and the bad times and be a part of it and cheer loud and come back year after year after year. And it has always felt like, hey, this is truly the fabric of Sacramento. Like you see everybody there and it's outside and we're in this amazing Sacramento environment and it's loud, as you know, just like we do in Sacramento. But it's truly special and ground up. And we had this community movement that didn't exist, right? Like the team didn't exist until 10 years ago. And now in its 10th season, like has just become a part of the community. And it was an unbelievable experience for me. It taught me so much. It was a roller coaster. Like we went through a lot, like when you're part of a kind of startup team and in the push for MLS, like which had a whole number of chapters, which you don't need to get into, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I'm so happy for Sacramento. I felt so privileged to be a part of that team. And like I said, a steward of that brand that means so much to so many people. And I'm a forever fan. And like I said, they have my heart forever.
Mm-hmm. And something interesting I want to talk about in terms of Sacramento Republic FC is obviously they're in the USL Championship, which it's considered the league directly below the MLS, right?
Right, Division 2 in the USL pyramid. Right.
And something, I'm an LAFC fan, which is pretty not surprising for being out here in LA.
You got to chat with Larry Friedman, and yeah,
that was amazing. But it was great seeing them win the championship this past year. I was lucky to be at that game, which was just, my head was exploding. It was one of the craziest experiences I've ever had. But something interesting about the MLS in the USL is basically the equivalent of the FA Cup, which is the Lamar Hunt US Open Cup. And so what in your in your period there, what did that mean to you to be able to basically compete with everyone across the nation? And I mean, the USL is one thing, but to be able to compete with the MLS and all the other clubs, professional clubs that are throughout the nation, is that really something that a club like Sacramento Republic FC really focuses on and takes advantage of?
Well, we did, and we did well. And last season, we actually made it to the championship of the U.S. Open Cup, which is unprecedented on millions of levels, right? And in U.S. soccer, 100-year-old tournament, right? It's certainly in the latest iteration of MLS and professional soccer in the last 20 years. No USL team, no non-Division I team has ever made it to the championship. And so talk about a magical run. And we had a number of runs, including playing against LAFC in their stadium as part of the US Open Cup, which a phenomenal game that went back and forth. And I think LAFC finally won in the 89th minute, 3-2, if I'm recalling correctly. Yeah, I mean, you talk about love for soccer and some of the, that global nature, like you said, FA Cup or Pokal or other things like in Germany, right? Like each federation, each country has that setup, and it doesn't exist, right, in North American sports in any other way that I can recall. And it's amazing that you can have the big clubs, right? LAFC was just in Monterey this past week, right? Playing there because hey, for this tournament, for the US Open Cup, this is all the US professional teams. We're all in the same tournament. And, this is David and Goliath and all the stories, again, going back to what we talked about at the beginning, the stories that we love. Talk about telling a story about, hey, being a part of the same ecosystem. Yes, there's differences and there's different, the teams are constructed in different ways, but for this tournament, we're all in there and everybody has a chance, and you're going to see some amazing stories. And at Sac Republic, we always felt that, yes, first and foremost, we were part of Sacramento. We were also growing a movement in soccer in Sacramento, but in the country too. And part of that investment was around the U.S. Open Cup and making this a mainstay. People know the FA Cup. People don't know the story around the U.S. Open Cup as much as they could and should. And I think with U.S. Soccer, who I've had the opportunity to work with now at Elevate, actually, and talking about the U.S. Open Cup and the investments that are making. And as the U.S. soccer pyramid continues to grow and investment dollars continue to go there, I see big things for that, because that's an amazing tournament. It's an amazing, there's so many, it's just the coolest stories that exist, right? We saw Wrexham this year in the FA Cup and making a run. Again, to be at the U.S. Open Cup championship last year in Orlando, with Sacramento having beaten, I want to say 4 MLS teams on that run, 4, and how much it meant to the players in the community, and seeing people that flew from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that flew from Sacramento midweek to be able to do this and to sit and cheer with them, unbelievable. And one of the experiences I'll remember for the rest of my life.
I think in the past, soccer has not been one of the primary 4 or 5 sports in the nation. I think that it has earned its spot there, and I think it's continuing to grow. Obviously, soccer is the world sport. I think that is very obvious. But do you think that it can potentially, I know you probably have more of an unbiased take because you're involved with all these leagues and involved with all these teams and venues and everything, but do you think that the MLS can get to a place where they potentially overtake the MLB and NHL?
Absolutely. And absolutely. Right. You look at the growth that's happening, you look at everything that's happening. Absolutely. And again, I have a ton of love for MLB and NHL and everyone. So I'm not saying it's going to happen. And all those leagues are growing in their own right. Right. Yeah. So sometimes I know we look at it a lot of times comparatively. Right. But if we just looked at the world, right. And is NHL competing with MLS or NBA? Sure. But they're competing with people going to movies or hanging out, and that's all a good thing. Is if sports can do the right thing and embrace their fan base and create amazing experiences, all those things we've talked about, hey, some are going to grow at faster rates than others, but I think there's a ton of growth for all these leagues, not to mention Formula One and who we get to work with, and tennis and pickleball and volleyball, all these other sports, right? That people forget about, but that are cycling and running, like you name it. Like there are things that are popping up that have never existed before. There are things that have existed for a long time that are still kind of not in the main zeitgeist of culture, but can be and will be. And again, from a personal level, like I love that I get a chance to work on all of that and get to work across the board at some growth leagues that are starting to find that path and everything that it takes to tell that story and figure that out and get fans engaged, to existing to the NFL, right? And still teams that are still building new stadiums and finding new ways to engage fan bases. And that's the coolest thing, right? Like to be able to work across that. But yes, like I believe in soccer. I love it. I might be a little biased, but I think they will continue to do well. Commissioner Garber is an amazing person, an amazing guy, and I feel privileged to have gotten to work with him on a few things. Like they're going to do great. They're going to do great, and I think there's more to come for a lot for Commissioner Berman on the women's side and her team. Like with the right people in place, I think that the ship is going to continue to sail.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're right in terms of the competition between viewership. I mean, it's not it's different viewership. Like it's not the same people watching all the sports. You're basically competing against everything else rather than just like the separate sports themselves. So
yeah, it would not against the couch sometimes, right? Like
yeah,
not
exactly. I mean,
so, and again, like I know you didn't ask this question. Like I think one thing that I've always done in leading sports teams, like in a community, right? Whether it's the Kings and Republic in Sacramento or in LA, right? Where you have, I don't know, 10 sports teams, like you have more than I can count.
Too many.
I love, and I think it's happening more than ever, right? I love when they all embrace each other. And in the Bay Area and did a lot of work with Al Guido, who's such an amazing leader at the 49ers, but also in the Bay Area community, and the support that they give for the Earthquakes, the Warriors, right? The A's, the Giants, like you name it. It's like Bay Area unite. Like we are together. And when you do well, like that is a great thing. And we will be your cheerleaders and we will be helpful to you, because again, like maybe on the margins, there's competition between these, but I think the communities and the people, the leaders that understand that, hey, there's something much bigger here, like embrace the community that embraces you. Like that's the right way to do it. And so I like the notion of just not thinking about them as competitors as much, or direct competitors, but also friends, colleagues, cheerleaders, support staff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is an obvious like kind of way that it's been expressed, but these teams, for example, like LAFC has a Dodgers night and a Lakers night and all these different nights. And it's just like, it's collaboration. It's the power of sports. It's where everyone's coming together to support not only one franchise, but multiple at the same time. I mean, it's awesome.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, and going back to the whole MLS thing, I don't think it's just us that thinks that soccer is growing in the nation. I mean, all these European guys keep coming over. I mean, LAFC has Denny Bouanga, obviously, who, in my opinion, should be the leader for frontrunner right now for MVP. And then they brought over this guy from Leeds. I mean, and Christian Benteke went to DC United. I mean, it's a whole movement. And you know what? Messi and Ronaldo might come soon too. So it's going to continue to grow. And that's, as a soccer player and as a person that is very involved in professional soccer, because I'm a huge LAFC fan and I just love analyzing the game. It's going to continue to grow. I mean, it has to, just because the quality of play, it's getting better. I mean, MLS is growing in popularity in Europe as well. I mean, more players are coming over, and it's really fun to watch.
You said it better than I could.
Yeah. So to kind of head into our concluding stages, I want to talk about your career as a total. Obviously, it's far from over, but you've encountered so many steps, including obviously the Giants, which we didn't even talk about, the San Francisco Giants, the National Basketball Association, which you briefly mentioned, and then the Kings, Sacramento Republic FC, and obviously a bunch more. So you really paved your way up the ladder, starting a role in 2002 as a senior associate consultant at Bain & Company, which is somewhere that you're still involved in very impressively, to today's role at Elevate Sports Ventures. So what has kind of helped you motivate yourself to continue kind of changing roles over time, and kind of persevere throughout your career to make sure you are in the best situation possible? Because obviously you love all these places, so it must be hard to move on.
Yeah, it's always hard to move on. And I think when you started to list some of those names, I'm like, wow, maybe I have been at quite a few places. But I think at each stop, like it felt, I think sometimes in today's age, and I talk to a lot of other students or other people in their career, and again, everyone needs to blaze their own path. Anytime I was in any of those roles, like I was in, right? Like I was in with 2 feet and then some. And I think that's the only way to do it, right? Like if you have to have a leap of faith. You have to have a presumption of trust that like, this is your place. And if you don't give it your all, like not only might you not do well, but it's not even gonna be as fun, right? And like the people around you like won't get the same energy from you unless you're doing that. So just to be fully committed, it's a word that we talk about a lot, like being committed is something that I feel like I've done, or I did naturally, and that's helped me. And some of these opportunities just come, and when there's the right opportunity, it's not always staring at you in the face, but like sometimes it happens. Like I was at the NBA in New York. Was working, with an amazing group of collegial, fun, super sharp people on some of the coolest stuff at the NBA. And I'm skipping some steps, but like my boss calls me into his office and like, I got 2 things for you. I'm like, what's up? And he's like, well, number one is I'm leaving and I'm going to be the president of the Kings. I was like, okay. And I was like, what's number 2? He's like, you're coming with me. Like, let's go. That was Chris Granger. So again, it's not like, I think that was a rare one, and I'm not really exaggerating at all. Like that's a rare one. I don't expect people to like find their next steps. Like, oh, that's when like there's a new opportunity. Sometimes it does come at you in that way. But I just feel like jumping in with 2 feet, working hard, right? Putting in like what you need, right? Not expecting anything out, right? Just like I talked about from a sports business, it's like, hey, invest dollars, do the right things, and the money will come. Like same thing with a job, like invest, and good things will happen. And I feel incredibly fortunate that that's been my story. And I've been around amazing people that are not just sharp and amazing, but have helped me along the way. Because like they're friends, and because they care about me, and because I care about them, frankly. And I would say one of my most amazing bosses and people of all time is a woman named Amy Brooks, who happens to be from Sacramento. I know that's so. As we go into our concluding session, I still want to tie in Sacramento. She's now the president. She's a president at the NBA, chief innovation officer, head of Teambo. One of the most amazing people in the world, as far as I'm concerned. And when you find those people, like, and I've felt like I found some of those throughout my career, again, like good things happen. And because they put you in the right positions to not just succeed, but to push yourself. And they put you in challenging situations, but in a way that you're set up to succeed. I think that's what I've tried to do throughout my entire career, to take big challenges, right? Going from the Kings to Sac Republic, right? Which was a startup. Like, hey, can we figure out how to continue to build this club from a very startup mentality? Can we make the march to MLS? Like it was a big role with a lot of downside, right? Or a lot of opportunities to fail. And, I've found more and more comfort in taking those risks and knowing that it's okay. And failures will happen. And like, how do you fail forward, and how do you learn? I think at each step I've had the enormous privilege to be able to learn from the experience, learn from other great people around me, like be a continuous learner, be humble, especially, and know what you don't know, and listen more than you speak. All of those principles, which are not just sayings in my vernacular. I think these are things that I think everyone should live and breathe. It's led me to all these doors. And now to be at Elevate, where, as I said, I get to work in sports that I never have before, we have an international business working with Formula One internationally. We're working with Everton on a new stadium, like working with a number of other just amazing franchises, Estadio Azteca in Mexico. I mentioned Formula One and tennis, and like so many other sports. It's it's amazing. I feel very, very fortunate to be able to do this, but I'm not going to slow down because not even because you're not supposed to, because it's not as fun. And if you're having fun, like if you don't love to learn about this stuff, and it's not to say that every day is like, hey, it's the most amazing thing, right? Of course, like there's parts of the business, right, that we all do. But like if you don't stop and reflect on like why you're doing what you're doing and like really understand your why and like love to learn, right? Not just because like it'll make you smarter in the next meeting, but like because you actually love to be curious, right? As my friend Ted Lasso would say, and being curious is like the answer. Like then like that is what we have to do, and you have to not just say it, you have to do it, you have to believe it. And I've made tons of mistakes, and I'm still learning and still figuring out, things that I'm good at and how to get better. But I feel like with those guideposts, it's certainly helped me along my career path, and good things will happen if I continue to do those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ted Lasso's certainly doing a good job over there at AFC Richmond, so it's great to see.
I feel like they got a good run. I got to
Yeah.
check the latest episode, but I like where the squad is heading.
I mean, it's the best show ever. It combines soccer and then it's great. It's great. I mean, it's good overall.
Soccer, comedy, mustaches, you name it, right?
Yeah, it's the best. Next episode, next Wednesday. I'm waiting for it.
Let's go.
So it sounds like you've kind of just you've just gone where life takes you. And I mean, coming out of college, I believe you went to UCLA and Stanford, right? Did you know what you wanted to do? I'm guessing you knew you wanted to go into marketing or sports marketing or something. And did you just kind of, like I said, go where life takes you?
Yeah, I mean, anyone that tells you they knew exactly what they were doing, like they have revisionist history, as far as I'm concerned. Like there's a lot of like, oh, I knew that this was going to be the 5 steps that were going to get me here. Like, no, and I certainly can't claim that. I think, there's a saying in climbing like that my friend used to tell me. I'm not a climber, but he's this amazing person who actually passed away, unfortunately, but talked about, it's like, how do you, it's like the saying, like whether you start a long journey or like, how do you climb a mountain, right? It's like, you look at the next 3 feet, right? Like, cause if you get too lost in this journey, right, and the daunting task or anything else, it's like, look at the next 3 feet. Like, what's the next step that will take you there? And then after that, like, what's the next step? And what's the next step? Like, I think for me too, as I said, like coming out of undergrad, I just wanted to learn, and that's one thing I always loved. And yes, I always wanted to get into sports, but I actually didn't go into sports, right? I worked for Bain & Company and got to learn from some of the smartest people, like working with clients like eBay and PayPal and Herbalife and private equity firms that were looking at railroad investments and luxury sheets, like you name it. Like I had a bunch of things thrown at me, but like I tried to sponge it all in, right? Like what makes business work? Like, like each one was different, but it's like, hey, how do you understand your customers and how do you build better connections, right? We talked about that with sports, which I think is an extreme way, but like this is true for every company. Like, who are you and what is your brand? What do you do well? Like, what do you not do well? Like, how do you supply like the right, the right products or services in the right way? And like, where's the biggest opportunity to do that and to grow? And how do you invest to make that happen? Like, what's the market and how do you look at different markets? And do you grow geographically or do you grow into different segments? Like, I know this is lame business stuff, but I mean, as you can tell, I like talking about this. Maybe it's a condition that I should look into, but like, and so like, to me, like that was my next 3 feet. It's like, be super smart about different businesses and learn how to apply it in different ways and like ask questions and learn. And I was surrounded by really smart people. I'm like, great. Like those are great people to ask questions to. And from there, I used to bug them all the time at Bain, like, hey, like we should work for the Dodgers. I was in LA. I was like, we should work for all these sports clients. And they're like, you know what? Like sports clients they're not typically consulting clients. They don't have the same budgets. And I would nag the different partners. And I think they didn't mind my nagging, but it's not what the system was built for. But then when I went to business school at Stanford, this amazing professor, George Foster, taught sports classes and brought in these amazing sports guests. And I was like, I'm going to take every sports class I can. And I would do all my projects, even in non-sports classes, about, making markets and like I thought of like a ticketing business and like wrote a business plan for school and got some of my classmates involved in that. So it was just like a somewhat of a maniacal focus on like, hey, how can I apply all these other things and like make it live through sports, which I obviously loved and had this passion for. But again, like, and you already went through the steps and we don't need to go through each one of them, but it was more like, hey, if you're like a voracious learner and ask the right questions, like going back to Bain, and then I met Amy, who I talked about, Amy Brooks, and she's like, hey, we actually are looking for somebody at the NBA. It's like, great. And had a great conversation. I think it still took 6 months for me to actually get a job offer and then jump in and take a big risk there. I was about to get married. We were living in California. It's like, well, but if you're going to take this job, you got to move to New York. It's like, all right, like if I'm ever going to do it, if I'm ever going to take a pay cut and jump into sports, and like, this is the time. So like, there were a ton of risks at each point, but I always felt protected in a way, right? Like I felt like if I did the right things, that the things will work out, and maybe the job won't work out or not, but that I would always be okay. And I feel privileged to be able to say that, but like, that's how I've been able to feel like continue to progress my career. And I don't know, I still have a lot. I feel like like you said, I know I'm old, but I have a long way to go and a lot more to do and a lot more to learn and a lot more to accomplish and a lot more connections to make like within this industry and in an industry that I love and that I want to continue to grow.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Gumpert, I appreciate all the advice, all the expertise. I wish you all the luck in the future, and especially with the Sacramento sports franchises. Hopefully won't need it, but just in case.
Hey, we will take all the love that we can get. So I appreciate you, and kudos to you. Again, I wish I was doing this, what you're doing and taking the initiative. You talk about taking risks and doing something special. And like I should have said earlier, like kudos to you on what you're building and the initiative you're taking and the work you put in to do this, and the amazing guests that you've had, like my friend Larry Friedman, and like it's incredible. So I'm excited to see what you continue to build here.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it, and we'll definitely stay in touch. So all the best.
All the best, Tyler. Thank you.